How's it going, everybody? It's Captain Trips 2017, and I want to start this video by talking about the North American video game crash of 1983. I'm sure you've all heard the story, and the short version is there were two games that really spawned this. There was E.T. for the Atari 2600, and there was Pac-Man for the Atari 2600. Now, Atari was so sure these were going to be huge sellers, they actually made more cartridges than there were actual Atari 2600s in circulation. And needless to say, Atari took a huge bath on these and ended up going into the red. And people started saying, well, that's it, video games were a fad, and that's it, we're going to move on to something else. But it wasn't true. A couple of years later, consoles would come back in a big way with the NES and the Sega Master System, all the way up to the Genesis, the PlayStation, etc. But in the meantime, in those years between, say, 83 and 86, what did we do for games? Well, most of us sold our Ataris and we bought 8-bit computers. And by that I mean Ataris and Commodores. Those were the two main ones. I had an Atari 400, but most of my friends had Commodore 64s. But needless to say, the games were much better. They were more complex and technically better. They had better graphics and sound. For example, the Atari 2600 version of Pac-Man looked like this, but the Atari 400 version of Pac-Man looked like this. Now that's quite a bit better. But anyways, there was a lot of great games for these systems, so I'm going to count down my top 10 8-bit computer games. The stipulations for this list are, it had to have been available for Atari and Commodore, and there's going to be only original games on this list. No arcade ports, no Pac-Man, no Donkey Kong, anything like that. So without further ado, Number 10, Spy vs. Spy. Spy vs. Spy was one of the more popular comic strips in the legendary publication Mad Magazine. Conceived in 1961 by Cuban cartoonist Antonio Prohias, Spy vs. Spy chronicled the rivalry of the black spy and the white spy, who were constantly trying to one-up each other using various ridiculous booby traps. In 1984, First Star Software brought this beloved series to life on 8-bit computers, where players could assume the role of one of these spies and play in split screen versus the computer or a friend. The object of the game was to collect the top secret briefcase, along with specific items, and escape the embassy, while killing one's opponent as many times as possible. This could be done through direct combat or by setting traps around the embassy. These included gun traps, spring traps, bombs, and acid-filled buckets. Most of the traps could be disarmed using items found around the embassy, if you could figure out where your opponent hid them. Of course, since it was split screen, it was possible to cheat and watch where your opponent planted his traps, but gamers with honor did not exploit this. Spy vs. Spy had two sequels, The Island Caper and Arctic Antics, and in 2012 it was given a makeover and re-released on the iOS, which featured both an improved, more modern version of the game along with the original 8-bit version. Number 9, Lode Runner. Lode Runner was an early platform game in which players had to traverse various levels and collect gold pieces, all the while being chased by guards of the Bungling Empire, an enemy that would appear in other Broderbund games including Choplifter and Raid on Bungling Bay. The player's only weapon? The ability to dig holes and temporarily trap the guards. Once the last gold piece was collected, a ladder would appear reaching to the top of the screen and leading to the next level. Sounds simple? Well, yeah, it was. But this game was surprisingly challenging and addictive. Lode Runner was one of the first games to feature a level editor, and players could put their own levels on a disc for their friends to play. A year after it came out, an arcade version of Lode Runner was released, and this would be one of the first times that a home game was ported to the arcade, and not the other way around. In the years to follow, there would be several more versions of the game, and some of the more recent versions have showed up on the Wii Virtual Console, Xbox Live Arcade, and iOS. Number 8, 7 Cities of Gold. This game was designed by the late Daniel Bunton, who later in life became Danielle Bunton Berry. It was a game of exploration set in the late 15th century. You played the part of an explorer commissioned by the king to seek out the New World and come back with gold in order to gain favor with the court. Once the New World was discovered, players would traverse the landscape and interact with indigenous tribes. This could be done peacefully or through violence. It was a relatively new thing in gaming back then, the choice to take the peaceful, more diplomatic approach, and this was a sign that gaming was becoming more sophisticated. Seven Cities of Gold was a precursor to more advanced strategy games like Civilization and was the subject of a remake in 1993 on DOS. Number 7. Karotika. This was an early side-scrolling beat-em-up developed by Jordan Mechner, who would later go on to develop the highly successful Prince of Persia series. In this game, the main protagonist, known only as the Karotika, set out on a mission to rescue the lovely Princess Mariko from the evil warlord Kuma, who has locked the princess away in his heavily guarded fortress. This game boasted amazing graphics for its time and had a cinematic quality that really invested players in the story. The combat system was simple by today's standards, but it was well constructed and set the tone for future beat-em-ups. A few years after its initial release, Karotika was released for the NES, and in 2012 it was re-released for iOS and Android, along with a full remake for iOS, PSN, Xbox Live, and Steam. Number 6. Blue Max. Blue Max was a diagonally scrolling game similar to Zaxxon. Players would assume the role of Max Chetworth, a 1915 RAF pilot otherwise known as the Blue Max, on his mission to destroy enemy bridges, tanks, anti-aircraft guns, and fighters. This game had a simple, arcadey feel, but was superior to most shooters available at the time. Your plane could take damage and affect how efficiently you could fly or shoot, and from time to time you had to land in order to refill fuel and ammo and repair any damaged systems. While landed on the runway, enemy planes would continue to fly overhead and drop bombs on your runway. This could be pretty tense, because all you could do was sit and wait and hope none of the bombs hit you before you took off again. In 1984, Synapse Software released a sequel called Blue Max 2001, which was essentially the same game but in a more futuristic setting. In 1991, a first-person game was released entitled Blue Max: Aces of the Great War, and in 2008, a free downloadable remake was released, simply entitled Blue Max 3D. Number 5. Beyond Castle Wolfenstein. This was the second game in the long-running Wolfenstein series. Continuing as the protagonist from the first game, your skills in escaping the dreaded Castle Wolfenstein have caught the attention of the Resistance. You have been sent on a mission to infiltrate the Führer's secret bunker and plant a bomb near his conference room. This game offered a more unique take on infiltration for its time. You would be disguised as a Nazi soldier upon entering the bunker. As you made your way through, you would have to show your pass to the guards. If you showed the right one, they would let you pass, and if you showed the wrong one, you could bribe the guard with a few marks. Even though you were armed with a pistol, you could go through the entire game without firing a single shot. The next game in the Wolfenstein series would be Wolfenstein 3D, which many gamers consider to be the original first-person shooter. Over the years, there have been a few more Wolfenstein games, with the most recent being Wolfenstein: The New Order, which was released in 2014. Number 4. Rescue on Fractalus. Rescue on Fractalus was one of the first titles developed by Lucasfilm Games, which would go on to become the recently defunct LucasArts. In this game, you played as a pilot on a search and rescue mission. Your objective was to rescue pilots who had been shot down by the Jaggies, humankind's mortal enemy. Players would launch from the mothership and navigate the surface of the planet Fractalus, named for the fact that the landscape was created by a fractal generator. Along the way, they would face laser turrets and UFOs. Upon spotting a downed pilot, the player would land, shut off the engines, and open the airlock in order to let the pilot in. But don't open that airlock too early, because sometimes the pilot would turn out to be one of those bastard Jaggies in disguise. He would pop up and scare the shit out of you and then start pounding on the windshield. If you broke it, you were dead. If you left your airlock open, he would come in your ship and start destroying it from the inside. Your only hope was to hit your boosters and head into space so you could blast him out the goddamn airlock, Ripley style. Rescue on Fractalus was a stunning game for its time, and was a great early effort from the company that would go on to make many, many great games. Number 3. Ultima 4, Quest of the Avatar. This was the fourth entry in Richard Garriott's groundbreaking Ultima series. This series really took adventure gaming to another level and set the stage for the epic RPGs people play today. Ultima 4 was different than its predecessors because rather than defeat some evil entity, the player had to master 8 different virtues and become the Avatar. So rather than defeating evil, the player was tasked with self-improvement. But don't worry, there was a lot of combat along the way. During the course of the quest, the player would encounter many different characters ranging from lowly beggars to Lord British himself. Some of the characters would be willing to join you on your quest and would end up becoming part of your party. You could recruit the usual types of characters, fighters, wizards, bards, and the like. I put many dozens of hours into this game back in the day, all the while listening to Led Zeppelin. In fact, whenever I hear the album Houses of the Holy, I'm instantly reminded of my days playing Ultima 4. Number 2. Archon. At first glance, Archon looks like a game of chess. The game consisted of a chessboard, populated by a variety of fantasy figures such as a wizard, dragons, and unicorns. The object of the game was to capture all 5 power points, or to eradicate the other army. Like in chess, one player could take the other player's piece, but this was not done simply by moving onto another piece's square. Once a piece was moved onto an occupied square, the pieces would be transported into a battle arena where they would battle it out arcade style. The winner would then get to stay on the square. Archon could be played by 2 players, or by 1 player against the computer, and each player would control either the light or the dark army. Archon was remade in 1994 for DOS and was released on the iPhone in 2009. And in 2010, it received another remake called Archon Classic, which is available on Steam. Number 1. Mule. This is the second game on the list that was designed by Dan Bunton, along with Bill Bunton, Jim Rushing, and Alan Watson. This game is not only on the top of the list, but it's definitely one of the best computer games of all time. When I started playing these games in order to capture the footage for this video, I was concerned that many of my favorites may not stand the test of time. I'm happy to say that my memories of Mule are not obscured by the old nostalgic goggles. This game is every bit as enjoyable as it was over 30 years ago. Mule was a game of economics in the vein of some of the modern board games, such as Settlers of Catan. In Mule, 4 players, either human or computer controlled, would simultaneously cooperate and compete in settling the planet Errata, which was Atari spelled backwards. Each player would be granted plots of land, which they would use to grow smith ore, food, or energy in order to consume themselves or sell for the highest possible price. Players could choose from 8 different races, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. The game contained many humorous elements, and the auctions could be quite harrowing. Mule also boasted a great theme song that still gets stuck in my head today. Mule Returns was released on the iOS in 2013, and there's a free, updated version called Planet Mule, which is available for free download on the web. If you've never played this game before, I highly recommend you give it a go. So that's it, folks. That was my top 10 8-bit games for Atari/Commodore. What were some of your favorites? Write them down in the comments below. And as always, like and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.